Thank you very much. I am delighted and also honored by your introduction and by the opportunity to speak to a group of enlightened colleagues from across the land, but primarily situated in the region of Allahabad, which has all kinds of connotations, spiritual, intellectual, and freedom struggle related halo around the city of Allahabad and the university. So for me, this is a special occasion, and I am delighted to be a part of this journey. Let me also state at the beginning that I am not an expert by any stretch of imagination on some of these issues that are going to be discussed or have been discussed today. But I'm certainly someone who is interested, like most of us. And I want to partake of this journey so that all of us collectively can possibly provide some insights on what needs to be done in the realm of education so that our nation can benefit and make progress. I have, of course, indulged in some experiments like all of us during the course of our lifetime as people connected with education. And I'll be happy to share some of my experiences here. But you know, I am a mathematician, as the introduction made you aware. And we mathematicians like to be very clear about things in terms of what we are discussing. And generally, we begin all our mathematical work by making very clear, explicit definitions. And in the context of education, I have my own definition. And it has helped me as a cornerstone, as a touchstone, and has allowed me to make my journey easier, clearer for me personally. And I hope to share that with you today. I have a very personal definition, as I said right now, and it applies to just an individual. So if I can understand what is education for one individual, then perhaps it will allow me to understand what education is across society, across the nation, even across geographical boundaries. And here's my definition. It's very straightforward. Education is a personal journey of self-discovery. There is no other meaning or definition to education. It is simply a look inwards. यह अंतरात्मा की खोज है हर व्यक्ति विशेष के लिए. Each one of us has to look inside and discover our own personal God. And I don't even want to define God. Or what I wish to say is that, in other words, each one of us must discover our swadharma. I believe each individual is born with a certain drumbeat, which I call the drumbeat of the soul or the antardhvani. हर व्यक्ति विशेष की अपनी अंतर्ध्वनि होती है. अंतःकरण की समझ लीजिए वह पुकार है. और अगर वह व्यक्ति किन्हीं भी कारणों से उसको सुविधा मिलती है और इस अंतर्ध्वनि की पुकार को, इस ध्वनि को पकड़ लेता है, समझने लगता है, और अगर समाज में, संसार में उस ध्वनि के अनुकूल कदम रखने लगता है, चलने लगता है, तो वह प्रशिक्षित होने लगता है. And he begins to get educated as soon as he recognizes the drum beat and he begins to march in harmony with the drum beat. That, to my mind, is the process of education. And you will have noticed that I have not qualified it with the business of an institution or granting of degrees or any kind of official status. It is not. It has nothing to do with this. So my definition is a very personal thing meant for every individual. And let me quickly explain to you, so that in mathematics we are always prone to this, and you will have to be patient with me. Every time we define a concept, it helps us to illustrate that concept with some examples. And that makes things a little clearer. So my favorite example is that of Mahatma Gandhi. Gandhiji discovered the drumbeat of his soul at a very young age. And he discovered it when he went to see this play at the age of 7, the play Satyavadi Raja Harishchandra. When Gandhiji returned home, the play had struck a chord inside him. His drumbeat, the drumbeat of the soul, began to resonate loudly. And that very night, Gandhiji took a vow that he will be like Satyavadi Raja Harishchandra, come what may. He will not give up his adherence to the truth. And from that day onwards, Gandhi began to march in the real world in harmony with this trumpet. That's when he started getting educated. You must pay attention to the following. One, that there was an external drumbeat, the play, the life of Harishchandra, a stimulus that touched a chord in Gandhiji's heart, and that awoke, that sort of roused the drumbeat within Gandhiji, and it began to resonate loudly for him. उस सोई हुई अंतर्ध्वनि को उसने जगा दिया. गांधी उसको सुनने लगे, उसकी पुकार को समझने लगे, और उसी दिन उन्होंने प्रतिज्ञा की कि मैं जीवन पर्यंत सत्य के अधीन रहूंगा, चाहे कोई भी कीमत चुकानी पड़े. It moved Gandhi greatly, and very soon in his life he began to face challenges over this vow to adhere to the truth. I think in the 7th grade, there was an English inspector of schools who visited Gandhiji's class while his English class was on. And this inspector, a Britisher, asked the whole class to spell a certain word in the English language. And Gandhiji did not know how to spell the word. Gandhiji's class teacher was embarrassed that this may earn him some negative grades. And so he hinted to Gandhiji that why don't you copy from the classmate sitting next to you? But Gandhiji refused. Now think about this. Here is someone who is a teacher. At that age, all of us who have been through school regard our teachers with great respect and great reverence. We almost literally worship them. And if they tell us to do something, we do it happily. But here is Gandhi who refuses to do that. Even though the teacher is going to be upset, and he was. When the inspector left, the teacher reprimanded Gandhi. But Gandhi was calm and self-assured. He knew he had done the right thing. Apna swadharma nibhaya tha Gandhiji. And this is how he was getting more and more educated. And let us now look at Gandhi's life. Tell me something. No matter what you call education, no matter what yardstick you look at, was Gandhi not educated? But think about this. He had no university qualifications. People have this mistaken notion that Gandhi had a degree in law. He had no degree in law. He had only qualified to practice law. He was certified to practice law by clearing an examination somewhat akin to the chartered accountant examination that we have in India, which does not really give you a degree. So my point is this. The whole purpose of education is simply single-pointed. Allow each individual to look within and to discover this drumbeat of the soul, and then start marching in the real world in harmony with this drumbeat, and the person will begin to get educated. I have many examples to illustrate this. You look at Sachin Tendulkar's life. Tendulkar has no qualification beyond his school. Nothing. At a very young age, through an external stimulus, something physical in the world, just like Gandhi, who saw a play in action. Tendulkar saw people playing cricket at a very young age. And it suddenly struck a chord inside. And that very moment onwards, he began to adhere to his dharma of playing cricket, to the exclusion of everything else, like Gandhiji. Gandhi ji paid such a heavy price throughout his life to adhere to his dharma. Tendulkar did the same. In those days, when Tendulkar decided he will not pursue any education beyond his high school, remember he came from a middle class family, that too from the city of Bombay. The middle class in India is very conservative, always a little paranoid, worried about the future of their children. Here was Tendulkar who decided not to worry. I'm often reminded about Mirabai, who had discovered a dharma by her pursuit of Krishna worship. Mira ke Prabhu Giridhar Nagar Duja na koi. To the exclusion of everything else, Mirabai focused on Krishna. In exactly the same way, Tendulkar, to the exclusion of everything else, focused on cricket. And now let's look at Tendulkar's journey. He has the Bharat Ratna. What other qualification would you want? What would you think Tendulkar was needing? Nothing. He got everything that an education gets for you, but that's not why he pursued cricket. तेंदुलकर क्रिकेट खेलने इसलिए नहीं आए कि भारत रत्न मिलेगा या धर्म कमाएंगे या यश कमाएंगे, वो तो धर्म निभा रहे थे। और जब योगी धर्म निभाता है तो as a yogi evolves, many virtues and gifts and powers descend on him. सिद्धियां प्राप्त होती हैं, उपलब्ध होती हैं। सबके जर्नी में, गांधी जी के जर्नी में फादर ऑफ द नेशन हो गए, अपोस्टल ऑफ नॉन वायलेंस, सत्य के पुजारी। तेंदुलकर भारत रत्न, क्रिकेट में इतने भारी यश प्राप्त किया, पर इसलिए नहीं किया था कि ये सब मिलेगा। अब हमारे सामने चुनौती क्या है कि हमारे पास शिक्षा इस प्रकार से हम उपलब्ध कराएं हमारी युवा पीढ़ी के लिए कि हर व्यक्ति विशेष अंतःकरण में झांक सके और अपने आप को पहचान सके और फिर उसके अनुकूल स्वधर्म को पहचान कर इस संसार में, इस समाज में कदम रख के चलने लगे। यही चुनौती है। और इस शिक्षा नीति में भले इस बात को उन्होंने कहा ना हो, अगर आप ध्यान से देखें तो इस शिक्षा नीति में इसके लिए प्रावधान किया गया है। और मैं बताता हूं किया गया है और उसका कारण भी बताता हूं। जबकि मेरा जब यहाँ इंट्रोडक्शन हो रहा था, परिचय दिया जा रहा था, तो थोड़ा बहुत कहा भी गया था। जब दिल्ली विश्वविद्यालय में मैं था एज वाइस चांसलर, तो हमने कुछ प्रयोग किए थे। और ऐसा नहीं था कि एक दिन हमको इल्हाम हुआ, सो के उठे और मुगलिया फरमान की तरह हमने उद्घोषणा कर दी कि आज से यह लागू होगा। इसके पीछे मैं अकेला भी नहीं था, तमाम लोगों का समूह था और बहुत गहरी लंबी सोच, अनुभवों के आधार पर इसके पीछे थी। उसी सोच के आधार पर हमने प्रयोग किया था। जो उसके पहले प्रयोग किए थे उन्हीं को हमने इसकी नींव माना था। क्षमा कीजिएगा, उसको हमने नींव माना था और उसी से हमने प्रयोग किए थे। प्रयोग के जो विशेष सिद्धांत थे, जो आधारशिला थी, मैं उसका वर्णन करता हूं और मैं बताता हूं कि वही इस शिक्षा नीति में लागू हुआ है और मैं इसका स्वागत भी करता हूं, क्योंकि इसी के आधार पर अगर हम लोग निष्ठा से लग जाएंगे तो भारत का इसमें हित है, भला होगा। आप फिर गांधी पे आइए, चाहे तेंदुलकर पे आइए, चाहे कबीर पे आइए, चाहे माइकल फैराडे पे आइए, चाहे सीवी रमन पे आइए, चाहे रामानुजन पे आइए, किसी पे भी आ जाइए, चाहे एल्बर्ट आइंस्टाइन पे आइए, चाहे न्यूटन पे आइए, चाहे डार्विन पे आइए, आपको जितने भी विशेष थे ये हस्तियां, महान हस्तियां, इन सब के अंदर एक कॉमन चीजें कुछ आपको मिलेंगी जो इनके लिए सामान्य इनके अंदर है। मैं उनका वर्णन करता हूं, जिसकी वजह से उनका लाभ हुआ, अपने अपने तरीके से वे प्रशिक्षित हुए, ऊपर उठे, सिद्ध हुए। What were those things? पहली चीज आप देख लें तो ये लोग सब हाथों के प्रयोग में निपुण थे, सब के सब। And I mean it literally, in other words, through a practical use of things around you. गांधी जी हर वक्त हाथों का प्रयोग करते थे, चाहे वो अपना खेती कर रहे हो, चाहे चरखा काट रहे हो, चाहे किसी की मालिश कर रहे हो, चाहे रस्सी बना रहे हो, चाहे कपड़े बना रहे हो, कुछ भी कर रहे हो, गांधी जी हाथों का प्रयोग सदैव करते थे। कबीर जुलाहा थे, बहुत कम लोगों को शायद मालूम होगा कि एल्बर्ट आइंस्टाइन was extraordinarily gifted in the use of his hands. We only seem to know him for all the great theoretical discoveries he made. What we don't really know is that he was a gifted craftsperson. When he took his PhD in physics, at that time his father, who was running an electrical goods factory, fell ill. And Einstein decided to start managing that factory. He worked on the shop floor of the factory where there were lots of electromagnets and such things. That's where his ideas on gravitation began to form, because he was playing around with magnets. Also, Einstein managed the factory so well that he almost gave up his career in physics, but his father recovered and took over the factory again. So Einstein went looking for a job. Could not find a job as a physicist. He became a patent clerk, third class, at the patent office in Bern. But all this while he was using his hands. He invented the world's first automatic camera. He invented the world's first safe modern refrigerator. You know, he held more than 50 patents and inventions to his credit. The point I'm trying to make is that he was extraordinarily good with his hands. Newton was a gifted craftsperson. As a child, he would use his hands to make all kinds of complicated mechanical apparatus. That allowed him to create his apparatus for his experiments on light. And when he did those things on light, that led him to gravitation. You can see the journey so clearly. Again, the use of his hands. Darwin, all through the journey of the beagle, all Darwin did was he used his hands to pick up different specimens across wherever he went, looked at them closely, handled them. There was nothing theoretical with what Darwin was doing. Everything was personal use of hands, digging, looking, climbing, all the time physical activity. C.V. Raman, you know, he worked as an accountant in the Accountant General's office in Calcutta while he was making his discoveries in physics. So 9 to 5, he used to work as an accountant. He was extraordinarily good as an accountant. But before 9 and after 5, C.V. Raman, with his own hands, built that apparatus. His total apparatus that got him the Nobel Prize cost him 200 rupees. All done with his hands. Very few people know that Feynman was extraordinarily good at repairing radios. My point is, व्यवहारिकता आवश्यक है, अनिवार्य है। शिक्षा के संबंध में अगर अपने अंदर झांकना है तो हमें व्यवहारिकता से जुड़ना होगा। हमारी शिक्षा की संस्थाएं एकदम हवा में उड़ गई हैं, धरती से जुड़ी नहीं है। 100 वर्ष पहले रविंद्रनाथ ठाकुर ने लिखा है कि our systems of education are completely devoid and removed from the real world. They have confined themselves to the blackboard and the walls of the classroom. They are not connected to the world. This education policy will allow us to reconnect if we think about it in the right way. And at the University of Delhi, when we conducted our new programs in education, the so-called 4-year undergraduate program, this was one of the pillars we used. Use of the hands, project work, connected to the needs and challenges of the nation and of society. So our curriculum was built around the needs and challenges of the nation and of society. We built things in a transdisciplinary fashion. That's the second thing I want to emphasize. Look how transdisciplinary Newton was. Look how transdisciplinary Einstein was. Look at how Gandhi was transdisciplinary. Here is a man using ideas from our philosophical texts for practical use in satyagraha. If this is not transdisciplinarity, if this is not practical action, what is? The Mimamsa school of philosophy, so ancient, so wise, says so with such clarity that knowledge without action is meaningless. Our education systems need to get back into the system of knowledge and action, or knowledge and skills, as two sides of the same coin. So you need to do that, and this policy recognizes this, and we recognized it, experimented with it at the University of Delhi with astounding results that rewarded us in our beliefs. So I welcome this policy for that reason also. There are other things that allow me to welcome this policy. To begin with, it gives you so much freedom so that if you really want to delve inside, and no one is born, or very few people are born with this immediate vision of what is their drumbeat. It always takes some external stimulus, something in the external world. I gave you the example of Gandhi, I gave you the example of Tendulkar, but everyone's life has had some stimulus. So a university, a system of education must provide an external stimulus. In other words, an environment where there are many drum beats, and the learner, the person seeking to discover himself, experiences each one of these drum beats, or as many as he can, till something strikes a chord in him, and then he chooses that pathway. But for that, he needs a platform of education that has practicality in it, hands-on skills, and enormous variety. In other words, choices, flexibility. Give the person some freedom. अभी हम क्या करते हैं? स्कूल में ही तय हो जाता है कि बच्चे को यही पढ़ना है, वरना आप कुछ नहीं कीजिए. कॉमर्स है तो कॉमर्स में उलझ के, साइंसेस है तो साइंसेस ही रह गया, ह्यूमैनिटीज है तो ह्यूमैनिटीज रह गया. भारत की ये परंपरा नहीं है. भारत में प्राचीन काल में जब हम नॉलेज इकोनॉमी थे, और देखिए एंगस मैडिसन के मोन्यूमेंटल वर्क ऑन द इकोनॉमिक हिस्ट्री ऑफ द वर्ल्ड from the 1st century AD till the early parts of the 17th century, he records that India was one of the largest contributors to global GDP. And in the last 2 years, we were way ahead of even China. India dominated global GDP in all these 1700 years. And why was that? Because knowledge was being put to practical use, and practical use was allowing us to generate knowledge. It was a two-way process. Skills and knowledge go hand in hand. India had recognized this very well. Our institutions of education in all these years and decades that have gone by have somehow deviated and removed themselves from this fundamental principle of education. The new education policy allows us to do that again, and at the University of Delhi, with great profit, we discovered this, we used it, and it brought us so much satisfaction. You will be surprised and happy to learn that undergraduates began to write research papers. They had patents and even startups. We must put knowledge to use. This policy allows us to bring entrepreneurship into play in a formal way. In other words, if a student has an idea through some effort to meet a certain challenge of the real world, and he uses knowledge hands-on, in groups, in projects, and decides I can put this to entrepreneurial use, give him that freedom, give him credit towards his degree for that. We did that at the University of Delhi. And just a few days ago, amongst the many results we had at that time, I received news that one of those undergraduates, 3 of them, just 1 year out of high school, had set up a startup which has just been funded by millions of dollars in the US. Incidentally, that startup began to be funded right from its very inception. And they got credit for their degree in that. But all through this journey, it has finally reached the pinnacle of success when in the United States, some companies have gotten together to give it a multi-million-dollar funding. That's just one example. There are many. We set up an electropreneur park in the university itself in cooperation with the Software Technology Park of India. We invited mentors who are experts in use of electronic technology along with digital technology for practical applications. And our students began to come to them with startup ideas through the curriculum. And at this point in time, I have been away from the university as Vice-Chancellor for 5 years. That Electropreneur Park, its total valuation of the startups runs into more than 50 crores. That is education. And this policy allows us to do that. So I want you to think carefully. I want you to understand this game, that the idea of education is not the acquisition of some formal degree. It is simply this: allow these children to discover themselves, make learning a process of joy. And we did that in so many ways, and the policy allows you to do that again. That is the most heartening part. One of the other pillars, we encouraged our students to work in groups. so that they would complement and supplement each other's abilities. And that was such a rewarding experience. I was listening to some esteemed speakers before my turn to speak, and I heard them speak about evaluation and the right to education and how continuous comprehensive evaluation, etc., is not happening or did not happen, and that is why it was harmed. Let me tell you something. More importantly, we need to think about how we evaluate our students. The philosophy, the purpose, the idea in India seems to be to hold examinations to disable students. हमारा हमेशा ध्येय रहता है कि किसी न किसी तरह इम्तिहान में बच्चे को लुढ़का दें, हम देखें कि इससे ऐसा सवाल पूछे कि जवाब न दे पाए. The entire purpose of the IIT entrance examination is कि ऐसा टेढ़ा सवाल पूछो कि कोई जवाब ही न दे सके. We do not use examinations as the means of enabling the student. उसको ऊपर उठाइए, उसको अपने आप से अपने आप को पूछने दीजिए कि उसके अंदर क्या है, क्यों नहीं है, क्या आवश्यक है, और वो उठने लगेगा. India has paid no attention to the process of evaluation. And let us not blindly imitate the West. This policy now allows you the freedom. It allows you the freedom to think carefully. How do we evaluate? Why are we looking for one single, one-stop solution for this? Let each child be evaluated according to his or her abilities. Srinivas Ramanujan 100 वर्ष पहले जब प्रयास कर रहे थे कि इंटरमीडिएट की क्वालिफिकेशन मिल जाए, उनको लुढ़का दिया जा रहा था. किसी ने यह सोचा नहीं कि यह श्रीनिवास रामानुजन हजारों साल में एक होता है, उसको फेल करते गए. अब देखिए इवैल्यूएशन की महत्ता क्या है. वही रामानुजन जिसको मद्रास यूनिवर्सिटी ने नहीं अलाउ किया इंटरमीडिएट का क्वालिफिकेशन लेने के लिए, कैम्ब्रिज यूनिवर्सिटी ने, उसके पास इंटरमीडिएट भी नहीं था, यानी 12वीं भी नहीं थी, बिना कोई प्रश्न पूछे उसने इवैल्यूएट कर लिया कि ये तो रामानुजन है, उसे पीएचडी की डिग्री यूं ही दे दी. फॉर्मल डिग्री नहीं, मतलब ऑनररी डॉक्टरेट नहीं, अ प्रॉपर फॉर्मल डिग्री वाज गिवन हिम. इसको कहते हैं एनलाइटेंड इवैल्यूएशन. इंडिया नीड्स टू थिंक अबाउट दिस एंड वी हैव नॉट. जब मैं वाइस चांसलर था, अगर उस समय भी रामानुजन आते मेरे पास, और मैं गणितज्ञ हूं, हमारे लिए वे देवता थे, जानते हुए भी मेरे पास अधिकार नहीं थे कि मैं रामानुजन को डिग्री पीएचडी की दे दूं कि ये श्रीनिवास रामानुजन है. अगर मैंने किया होता तो मेरे ऊपर इंक्वायरी कि इन्होंने गड़बड़ किया है, सिस्टम को तोड़ा है, ये किया. ये कोई नहीं कहता कि ये श्रीनिवास रामानुजन है, इनको दूसरे तरीके से इवैल्यूएट. Let India think about this carefully. Let India use this opportunity. And let me also point out, I'm almost at the end of my discourse with you. Let me also point out to you something else. That unless we as teachers, because I believe I'm largely addressing teachers over here, if we do not rise to the education, to the challenge, no policy will help us. Think carefully. ध्यान से सोचिए. इस पॉलिसी में ऐसा कोई प्रावधान नहीं है जिसकी लगभग हमको छूट नहीं थी बिना पॉलिसी. किसने कहा था, कहां लिखा है कि आप ट्रांसडिसिप्लिनरी तरीके से नहीं पढ़ा सकते, कहां लिखा है कि व्यवहारिक नहीं बना सकते, कहां लिखा है कि एंटरप्रेन्योरशिप नहीं ला सकते, कहां लिखा है कि जांचने के इवैल्यूएशन के कोई नव प्रवर्तन के तरीके ले आइए. कहीं भी नहीं मनाई है. हम तो सिर्फ ऐसे ही निहत्थे होकर बैठ गए थे कि कुछ नहीं हो रहा है, चलो हम ऐसे ही बैठेंगे. तो दोष हमारा भी है और हम अध्यापक वर्ग को इस पे बहुत गौर करना पड़ेगा. जब हमने यहाँ लागू किए थे ये सारे जो परिवर्तन है, जो नई चीजें हैं, नई सोच है, नई युक्तियां हैं, उसके पीछे हमें इतना परिश्रम था, इतनी मेहनत थी. 2 वर्ष हमने अपनी फैकल्टी को ट्रेन किया था ग्रुप्स में निरंतर, जिससे कि जब लागू करें 30वें वर्ष में तो हमारी तैयारी भी काफी हद तक अच्छी रहेगी. तब भी सतर्क रहना था. उसका प्रयास हमेशा हम करते रहे कि सतर्कता बनी रहे, अपने को सुधारते रहे. और टीचर का रोल यह नहीं होना चाहिए कि बैठकर ब्लैक बोर्ड में पढ़ा के रटावे. पॉलिसी हो चाहे ना हो, इस पे गौर कीजिए, परंतु यह पॉलिसी भी यह बात को कहती है कि इसको हमें हटाना है. रविन्द्रनाथ ठाकुर ने भी कहा था, Mahatma Gandhi ने कहा था, और Gandhi ji was qualified like Tagore to speak on this. He never spoke on anything unless he had experimented. He first set up a school in South Africa, which he ran with success personally. Then he set up a university in Ahmedabad that functions till today. Then he set up a polytechnic for women in Wardha. On the governing body of the polytechnic, he put India's foremost scientists, C.V. Raman, Bose, they were all on the governing body. And then Gandhiji said that in education, what you do with your hands enters your heart. And what have we done? Have we listened to him? Did we listen to Tagore? Did we listen to the lessons of the Chandogya Upanishad, Gautam Haridrumat ke, Gurukul ke jitne bhi sabak hai? They are modern lessons in wealth management. Powerful lessons. लेकिन हमने तो ध्यान ही नहीं दिया है. ये पॉलिसी भी कुछ नहीं कर पाएगी अगर हम अध्यापक वर्ग ऊपर नहीं उठाएंगे अपने को. हम तो इस तरह से दिशाहीन होकर, सुस्त होकर बैठे रहते हैं. मैं अपने को भी दोष दे रहा हूं, किसी एक व्यक्ति विशेष को नहीं, इस वर्ग को दोष दे रहा हूं कि हमने सोचा ही नहीं. The challenge is on us, and believe me, unless we become a knowledge economy, unless you implement all these things, you will not become a knowledge economy. And if India does not become a knowledge economy, no matter how much you try, your GDP will never really go up high in a sustained long-term fashion. वो नहीं हो सकता. मैं उदाहरण दे रहा हूं. You've all heard of Google. You know, a few years ago, I looked at the figures for Google, the quarterly figures. And I also looked at this for the same quarter, the financial figures of 4 of India's top IT companies. Google is also an IT company. What the 4 companies were, and at that time, Google had less than 10,000 employees. उस समय की बात कर रहा हूं. It was less than 10 years old. And one of India's leading IT companies then was 50 years old and had 100,000 employees. And what Google was making in one quarter, all the companies put together were not making in a year. Do you see the difference? Why? Because all these companies run on manual labor. There is no knowledge in action there. Google works on an undergraduate mathematical and programming idea, transdisciplinary idea at the undergraduate level, which has allowed it to work miracles. That is the power of a knowledge economy. India used to be a knowledge economy in the ancient past and not so ancient past. When Vasco da Gama came to India, people say we were taught, and that is the other tragedy, that we have been so heavily influenced by the West needlessly. He didn't discover the sea route to India. For centuries before that, and I'm well versed with this history, so I say this with confidence. From before the time of Christ, our seamen used to go all the way there and come back without difficulty because they had understood how to navigate the high seas. In India, when Vasco da Gama came from Africa, he picked up an Indian navigator by the name of Kana. And Indian ships used to travel from centuries before that. They were using a mathematical device called the Ruppel guy. And that allowed them to find position at sea. At that point in time, when Newton tells the British Parliament that science knows no means of determining position at sea, because that was a huge problem for them, Indian ships were doing this effortlessly. That is the power. So it allowed us to trade and come back safe and secure in good time and bring wealth into the country while the Europeans were failing repeatedly. That is also the power of a knowledge economy. And thirdly, some time back, I looked at Stanford University and the ecosystem around Stanford. And this is not peculiar to Stanford. This is true of all major universities, not just in USA, but also in Europe. Stanford has about 4,000 companies around its location, all directly deriving benefit and advantage and startups from the Stanford knowledge system. You know what is the total strength? Just in 2011, it was $3 trillion, just those companies together. $3 trillion, more than the GDP of many countries. This is in 2011. That is the power of a knowledge economy. This education policy has brought this into focus. But we will have to rise to the occasion, and we will have to stop blaming systems And I'm telling you, none of these universities, not Stanford, not Harvard, not Cambridge, not Oxford, none of them really depended on a policy to rise and make themselves great. They rose because of the things that I enunciated before you: transdisciplinarity, hands-on, connect to the needs and challenges of the world, give freedom to students to discover themselves, project work, etc., entrepreneurship. So we have this opportunity. At least the policy has allowed us to bring everything back into focus. Let us grab it with both hands and let us rise to the occasion and take India forward. Thank you very much.